Hello, and we're talking about the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, and I'm on my third try of doing this. And I'm just not going to make a fourth try, so let's pray that it works. Looks like the microphone is working this time. Looks like it's actually recording this time. I should never do video. But I'm doing video because I didn't feel like doing text and I didn't do audio, and I needed a way to actually work out my own thoughts. So, like, putting together this very primitive PowerPoint helped me figure out what I was going to do with the ballot. And since I put it together, I might as well like talk it through and put it in and make it content. Because everything needs to be content. You can't just do something. You have to put it out there for some way, for some reason. The Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is a badly. Every time I'm looking at the description, the third time again, I get more annoyed about how the criteria is hard to read. Drawing power. There's three criteria: drawing power, being good at the wrestling, and being historically significant. You need to be ideal if you're all three. If you're like really, really, really good in two of them or one of them, then maybe we can put you in anyways. It used to be that you got 10 votes and could vote for whatever you wanted to do. And then I committed various criminal acts where I used 10 votes in one category, which was within the was within the guidelines, but was definitely violating the spirit of the idea, and now you can only vote for 5 people in the category. I don't know if it was about me, but I'm just going to internalize everything because I'm just very annoyed right now. That means for like a sucker like me who only votes in one category, there are people who I might vote in some other year that I don't have room for right now. In fact, we have 11 people that I could vote for. I used 5 votes on them. Most of them are names from the past. There's a couple people still active, kind of active, and there's Mystico and these Mystico. We have 11 names in the Mexico ballot. My goal here is to cut it down to 5. So 6 names have to go because that's how subtraction works. I don't even necessarily need to vote for 5. I just need to have no more than 5. If I don't find 5, I could always say 4 or 3 or whatever. Everyone has a reason to be on the ballot, almost. And so my idea, back when this was a good idea, was to make the easiest decisions first and then just kind of work my way into the harder ones until I had to make some tough choices that I didn't want to make. The easiest choice to me is Mystico, and I don't want to talk about Mystico because I always talk about Mystico. Mystico is an obvious Hall of Famer who was a huge draw. Even more than he was a huge draw, he's a bigger historical significance. That's why I've arrived that they're talking about this so many times. And he's underrated good in-ring performer. He's like obviously in. He's only not in because everyone hates WWE run and because he's young and people don't want. Even though you're on the ballot when you're 35, a third to a half of the voters will just not vote for anyone who's under 40 and under 45 even. So it's a stupid rule that does not work for anyone unless you are a no doubt guy who's going to get in anyways. So, but that's the hand we're dealt. He will either get in this year, or he'll get in next year, or he'll get in the year after that, and who cares? Whatever. On the other side, Hijo del Santo and Octagon do not belong on this ballot. It's ridiculous and just a bad use of nominations to put him on this ballot. It's a waste of everyone's time. That's the third most famous Octagon team, Octagon Atlantis. If you follow CML at all, in the least, you know that they will not stop talking about this Octagon Atlantis team, the movie they were in, having them team up with their sons, have their sons team up together, have their sons fight for no reason. I'm very annoyed. That's like as a cultural significant team in Mexico itself, it's a bigger team. Octagon La Perca, because if you were a AAA fan of a certain age, they were the guy who came to your house show. They came to your local city because they went to every single local city and main event every single house show. Usually with third people. There's not really that many 2-on-2 teams here, but they were everywhere for a while. They were not huge draws. They were not they were not like great wrestling teams. By far, they were not a great wrestling team, but they were like ubiquitous as a AAA representatives for a long time until Octagon and AAA had their falling out. Octagon Hijo del Santo, besides the one match everyone knows, they have pretty much nothing except, maybe nostalgia comes back. Nostalgia working together after Octagon gets kicked out of AAA or Octagon quits or fired or whatever. They're a big deal only because there's like 5 Lucha Libre matches anyone else who doesn't follow Mexican wrestling have seen, and one of them is Los Gringos Locos versus Octagon and Hijo del Santo. And if you're a person who has a bare knowledge of Lucha Libre and nothing more, then they must be a big deal because they were in that match. there were, because it was a match with Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr. It was the last match of Art Barr's life. It's a important milestone in the career of Eddie Guerrero, where like two people do not follow who do not follow Lucha Libre. That's the moment he left. That's his last great moment in Lucha Libre before he goes to ECW and becomes a U.S. star. Even though he's kind of doing other stuff beforehand and was still in Lucha Libre, but that's who cares. Most of all, it's like the English language show that everyone, the one English language show people in the U.S. saw in the 90s, and for most of the OOs too. It's a tape that got passed around to everyone, and that's their primary knowledge and maybe their only knowledge of Lucha Libre. So it's a huge deal for people who trade tapes. For people who live in Mexico and watch AAA on TV, I think they think it's an outstanding match, but it's not a match that like is culturally relevant in the same way, because there are other great matches that they saw on TV that came in Arena Mexico or on a Triple Mania that may not have been the same quality of that match, but they were like a bigger deal at the time. And this match is a big deal primarily because it was a English language show that like a lot of people did not pay for to watch originally, but paid some guy who made a really bad VHS copy, who sent it to them 3 years later. I hope like my VHS copy did not have the main event of that show, which was not that hair match. And now that I remember that, I'm still upset about that. If this match happened on AAA TV, then let's get to the regular TV from August Gallantes or from like whatever the equivalent for Ronald Escandalo was. They didn't have that then, but like a major show in the middle of the summer in Mexico, no one would be talking about it. They wouldn't be on the candidate. I think we just like were reaching for Mexican teams to throw on the ballot, but then like throw Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero, or throw Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero themselves. I'm not sure if they've not been on the ballot, but that would be like the better team. Because they were the better team in that match. It didn't last long, but neither did Octagon and Hijo del Santo. And now we hopefully can never talk about that again. So 9 names ago, we got one up, one down in a lot of between. Let's sort it out here as I talk too fast. We can split this up a little bit. Take the really old guys who I'm not sure if anyone voting on the ballot, maybe like 5%, 10%, have ever actually seen wrestle. But we're going off magazine clips, we're going off newspaper clips, we're going off what older wrestlers say about them, basically. The first one up is Dory Dixon, who's Dory Dixon in the U.S., and I slip up and call him Dory half the time. Great story. Jamaican bodybuilder, weightlifter, comes to Mexico for a weightlifting competition, a Pan American competition, decides, you know what, I'm just staying in Mexico. I don't want to go back to Jamaica. Defects to Mexico, does odd jobs for a while, and then like everyone's like, you're a weightlifter and a bodybuilder. You probably should be a professional wrestler too. They train him for wrestling. He gets a big push right away because it's, especially in those early days, not like it's a whole bunch different now, but it's like, you're a foreigner. We can build you up, and then we have the Mexican beat you, and it's a big triumph for Mexico. And so that's how his first NWA title reign came. He stayed active in Mexico for a long time. He got better, he was a bodybuilder, weightlifter, was thrown into wrestling. He was not great at first. He got better as time went by. He became like a credible guy to put on cards, so that when Promotion More, which everyone thinks of the UWA, starts, he's a guy, when they get him to show up on their shows, that means that, oh yeah, this is a real promotion with real people. Even if he's not pushed, even if he's just a guy in the card, that's like a guy in the card that everyone knows is like doing real professional wrestling, whatever that means. He's still alive, still lives in Puebla. He does not have a Twitter account, but if he had a Twitter account, it would be mostly quotes in the Bible. He's that kind of guy. Historical significance is like, he's a super famous guy. It's like, he's the most famous black wrestler in the history of Mexico, and like you could not even come up with number 2. And if you could come up with number 2, it wouldn't even matter, because they're like a galaxy of distance between Doral Dixon and whoever is in number 2, whoever you want to agree on who's number 2. And he was around forever, and everyone knows the name, and everyone knows the look, because like a bodybuilder, weightlifter guy who had a unique look in Mexico was, of course, when magazines were the media of choice, was on every cover, was in the magazines. He was like a guy that fit what wrestling was at that time, especially in the 50s and the 60s. The problem with him is that like he got his big push early on, And then he was a gatekeeper guy for most of his career. He was a semi-main guy. He's a guy who would, and this is where I got screwed up before, so we'll see what happens here. That didn't work. A guy who would lose to the top guys, basically. If you look at his Apostle record back on the Lucha Wiki, which is not coming up in full screen, let's see if we can make this bigger. We can adjust. Wow, we're moving on the fly here. You can see that most of his big matches are like putting over like top names. He's not losing to scrubs. Even Carlos Plata is not a name that people know. He's a good name. He had a good career, and like those are like late in his career, where he's just trying like cashing a check at that point. But he puts over the big names, but he's not a big name himself. He's not getting the wins. That one win is really more about Ray Mendoza and their daughter trying to do their feud with other people involved. He does not have great title wins. The other thing working against him is that he's a... Let's see if we close this. See if we do this right. Yes. He's a guy who's a foreigner in a promotion that only has one title available to him, really, the NWA light heavyweight title. He's not a middleweight. He's not a welterweight. Light heavyweight... There are issues with the light heavyweight about who gets to be champion, but it's a very protected title. It's only going to the very top guy. And if he's guy 5 or guy 6 or not guy 7, he's just never going to... It does not make sense for him to get another reign after his first one. And he can't... If he was a Mexican, he could challenge for like the light heavyweight championship or the national heavyweight champion. He would be like one of the better national heavyweight champions they had in that era. But he's a Jamaican, so he's not allowed to challenge for those titles. So he has no other... really avenues to do stuff. So he really didn't get a chance to be a drawing power, but he wasn't to be a drawing guy, but he was just never one. Everyone's like respectful of his in-ring talent as time goes by, but there's no like he's actually one of the better guys. There's a lot of people that seem to be put ahead of him in the magazines. He is a classic Roger Maris candidate where he is famous for one thing and had a good career. Like Maris had the Baseball Hall of Fame record and had a good career, but like he didn't have a Hall of Fame career. But he was also famous enough that everyone knew his name. And if it's called a Hall of Fame, then should you put all the famous people in or the great people in? Observer seems like they go towards more of the great people. And so we have endless arguments. Like, I don't have endless, but European people seem to have endless arguments over Big Daddy that I don't care about. And Jory Dixon is not as big of a star as like Big Daddy sounds like he was, but he's also like super famous guy that like when you look at the baseball card stats, he does not, it does not impress us the way as his reputation is. So what do you do with that? I'd probably leave that guy off. Next guy is Rio Romero, a 40s, 50s luchador. So I told this a longer version of the story before. Short version, he was a EML star who jumped from EML to work with various promoters as competition to be the biggest star against EML in Arena Mexico. For a time, it was going great. The time was maybe like 3 years at most. And then they lost TV because everyone lost TV. Mexico City kicked all wrestling off TV, and he was screwed. And so he wrestled in Texas. He wrestled other places. He eventually got welcomed back into Arena Mexico and was wrestling in Arena Coliseo Guadalajara for like the end of his career fairly regularly. But he does not seem like his peak is very short because like he lost the wrestling war, and that's kind of what happens sometimes. He is remembered because he does a move that he and fans call La Tapatia, and everyone today calls the Romero Special. I don't think 80% of the people who are listening to that know who Romero is, but that does keep his name alive, even though if it's not the name of his move, I can't keep telling you it's not the name of his move. He's on the ballot not because everyone knows his name, but because Jushin Liger, because a lot of Mexicans carried around that move for years, and then Jushin Liger came to Mexico, saw that move, brought it back to Japanese, and like, wow, that's a great move that Jushin Liger came up with. That's called the Romero Special. No idea who that is, but Liger's pretty cool. And that's how Mexican wrestling works in the U.S. Magazines really romanticize that 30s, 40s, 50s era, and they are very favorable about the kind of technical wrestler Romero was. Like, there's no fudge. Just like, does not even exist. It's not even a thing that almost exists. It just does not exist. So we're just going on reports. I think it's possible that like if he was a 2022 guy and we saw him every week, maybe that alone would put him in, but just hard to tell just by vague reports in magazines. He's just never. He's like always a guy who's just barely hanging on the ballot. He's never going to get in unless I write a bio, which I'm never ever doing, or Alfredo from Lucha World writes a bio, or Matt Farmer writes a bio, or gasp, someone in Mexico actually writes a bio about that's in English and persuadable for people, and that's never happening. So someday maybe someone will get bored and do it, but it feels like a wasted vote for his time. And maybe he belongs. The more I think about, the more I've studied or looked at his career, it just seems like it's just too short of a peak to put him in. But again, like someone could write it up and make a case that I should be using my vote on him. But if I only have 5 votes, I'm not going to use one on a guy who's just never going to benefit from it anyway. The last guy, as I stopped to drink water. Water was great. It was Huracan Ramirez. I'm not telling the Huracan Ramirez story again because it took 5 minutes. But it was a movie. He was not the star in the movie. He got the gimmick about a year after the movie. He surpassed the movie. He became a very big star. He became every flyer who the current generation, the past generation hates because he's doing stuff different than what they were doing, and they believe that's not real wrestling. So he got bad talk for a while, and there are reports of him like stopping to do what he was doing as Huracan Ramirez to show that he was a wrestler before that and he can do all the technical stuff, and then the promoters would get mad at him because they wanted him to do the high spots. That's why they brought him in. This is not a new story. This is a story that you hear every time. Huracan Ramirez, but it was like the reports on him were just he was a graceful, very impressive flyer. It's not just that he was the guy who did the Huracan Rana first, because he might not have been the guy who did. He's the guy who popularized it. But it's that he was really, really good at doing the stuff and other stuff he did. And he was very popular. He's the other issue with him is like there's huge her historical significance to Huracan Ramirez, but there's also there's a problem with the name where because it came from a movie, the movie people yanked it back from him at the end of his career and gave it to a whole bunch of other people, and all those people, either your journeyman AAA or CML wrestler or guy working in front of 20 people in a dirt ring kind of thing, it made Huracan Ramirez feel less special. It did make Daniel Garcia, who was the actual Huracan Ramirez we're voting here and not some AEW star, it made him to me, it makes him more responsible for his success because it had very little after him, but it confused the whole issue for many years. Now the fake Huracan Ramirez, they're not really fake, but you get the idea. Those have generally disappeared and gone away. I mean, there is a couple I still see in Mexico, but they're working very small shows and they're not on anyone's minds. I think this guy kind of got out of that shadow, but also his name is becoming increasingly in the past. That time might be running out for him. I believe that if it was just a Mexican vote, that Huracan Ramirez would get in because just as I read this, or I'm not writing, I'm talking. 2 weeks ago, IWG just brought it, and another promotion brought in Huracan Ramirez's family just to celebrate the 16th anniversary of his death. No special big round number. They just this is a big star. We need to remember him. That's kind of his place in the historical significance. He was a guy who drew in Mexico and around Latin America. In some places, at least anecdotally, he became the big Mexican wrestling star because he got there before Santo. He was other places not as big, but still a meaningful guy. He's a guy who did not need the hype of Arena Mexico and the magazines that only covered Arena Mexico to get over. He was just popular enough on his own. To me, the reports on those work sound good. I think it's probably a guy who other wrestlers at the time did not like for the reasons that he was doing something different, but it sounds like he had a great style and that he would have got over much later. And the guy probably inspired other people to try things. So I think he's one who every year seems like he should be in, but I think it's just obscure name at this point and increasingly obscure that I'm not sure if he's going to get in, but it feels like a guy is worth voting every time because if this was in context, if somehow we were doing Wrestling Hall of Fames in 1987, he would have automatically got in, and it wouldn't have even been thought. And we had like people in paying attention to lucha doing the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, which if you read those 1987 observers was not happening. It was not happening until like 1990 maybe. Anyways, so we got Mystico and Huracan Ramirez in, Hijo del Santo out, Dory Dixon, Rio Miro. You know, if I had 10 votes, maybe I'd put them in, but like I don't have 10 votes. I have 5, so that's a problem. That's a math issue right there. Let's break up further. Tag teams. We have Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner. We have Los Hermanos Dinamita. And we have Los Villanos. They were 3 teams, definitely. I have no idea what to do with the tag teams. Thank God we're at the part where like I didn't talk about this twice already. But it's still an annoying part. Like Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, if you're not following this, they threw in like tag teams were rarely included in the nomination list, and then like this year the rules changed like so that if one member is in the Hall of Fame, usually the idea was like if you had a team of Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero, and Ultimo Guerrero gets in the Hall of Fame, then Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero as a team can no longer be in the Hall of Fame because you already put Ultimo Guerrero in. Now you can put the tag team back in, which means a lot of teams where one person is in the Hall of Fame can come back on the ballot. In this case, it's Dr. Wagner and Angel Blanco, where Dr. Wagner went in years ago, and he's back on the ballot. And it's the Villanos, where Villano 3 himself went in the ballot and went in, and now his whole family's in. It's just completely unclear, and this dates before these tag teams were added, what you're supposed to do with tag teams. In the very strict reading of the rules, it's like tag teams should be evaluated for a work as a tag team. So that means literally only the matches they have as a tag team count. You're not supposed to count their singles matches. You're not supposed to count when they break up as a tag team. It's really even unclear if you're supposed to count like if they're a trio but they're teaming with someone else. Is that has a tag team? The reading of it is just totally like makes sense in one person's head, and everyone else is kind of guessing what it's supposed to be meant by it. I hate it so much. I'm not sure if I'm making this clear. I hate it so much. The reality is that no one pays attention to what he says anyways, and they're just, if you look at the voting patterns, everyone's counting like anything that they're treating it more like a faction instead of a tag team, if that makes any sense. Like anything they do anything they do while they're a unit counts, and just while they're a unit. So like if Cian Curtis has a singles match while he's the greater team going on with Mascara, Honor of Dos Mil, and Universe of Dos Mil, by the rules that are in, you're not supposed to count that, but people are counting it anyways. I did a very strict application of the rules, and that's kind of what I think should be done. But looking at the voting, no one's doing that. Everyone's just counting whatever they want to count, and that makes the whole thing silly. But so it goes. First tag team we have is Olo Blanco, Angel Blanco, and Dr. Wagner. From the results I have, they started teaming in about 1967, split up in 1973, and then they would go from feuding to back for a while, to feuding to back a little while. They were often the lead Rudos during that time. They really, they sort of got the spot that was going to Carlos Garde and Rene Guerrero, even though those guys were still around that time until they left as part of the UWA. But they kind of they were taking part of the responsibility, moving up as the Rudos. One of the weird things about EMLL is that they didn't have tag team titles, even though they had tag teams, and even though every month you would have a magazine saying, this is the best tag team of the month, or this is the best trio of the month. They just didn't, and even though tag team titles were a thing, they just were not a thing in Mexico. Well, that was a great sneeze. I'm just talking. It's late. I'm going to get through this. They didn't have, what you will find in some results, a mention of Arena Mexico tag team titles, and they're not real things. They're fake things. They are closer to what we have today as tournaments, where once a year they would have a tournament, and then maybe if they thought about it again, they would have the winners defend it again. And you can see Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner beat Hijo del Santo and Rayo de Jalisco for those tag team titles at one point. But they were not ongoing things. They were not something, I'm going to win these tag team titles. They were a thing to take up a week when they didn't have something else going on. They were not the priority of anybody. It's very weird for me that they did, but it's not until like UWA comes around so they create this great innovation of maybe we should have tag titles, maybe we should have trio styles, and then the Mexican National Commission decides, oh yeah, those are things, we should have those too. It hurts for all the tag teams in Mexico because they would definitely have bigger matches and they would have bigger competitions. They would be bigger spots and they would have more counting stats if those tag team titles existed, and they just didn't, and they're not really fault of the wrestlers. But I guess in some way you can say that that's what they prioritize the tag teams, or they deprioritize the tag teams, is they build everything around them. I think that's where this comes to the problem, this classification, because by strict tag team wrestling, they're like Alamo Blanco and Dr. Maria close. I mean, they are good wrestlers, great wrestlers at times, who are near the top, but when they have their big matches, they're doing them as singles. There's not really a drawing record you can put them being a tag team because they are barely ever a tag team. Like, their one big Aposta match comes, as I type very loudly, comes near the end of their career, the end of their first run as a team, when they win one against to be rude, a no-name named Superstar, Enrique Vera. They have an earlier one that if it's unknown, that means it's probably a small arena. Well, for those guys, maybe not, but it's not like they were not headlining anniversary shows. They were, except for the one. They were not as a tag team. They were doing stuff as singles, and they would go on to do stuff as singles, but they didn't get the tag team opportunities to be top guys. They were very well thought of mid-card wrestlers, or upper mid-card wrestlers, or main event guys for a while to set up another program or a singles program, or allies that would just keep on going back to each other while they were having their individual feuds. So if you're just counting the tag team borderline, maybe not. If you count anything they did while they were a tag team, even the single stuff, then yeah, because Wagner's already a Hall of Fame for stuff he did mostly during that tag team run, and Angel Blanco adds nicely to that thing. So, however you interpret the rules is really how you're going to vote for those guys here. Let's see if we get back to actually forming this. Our third team, Los Hermanos de Aminta, Sin Caras, Máscara Años 2000, and Universal 2000. Make sure you have the accent mark over the end when you're doing Máscara Años 2000, or all the Mexicans will make fun of you, and probably rightfully so. The problem with the trios is that, when do they start and when do they end? Because, Sin Caras and Máscara Años 2000 come in and start teaming years before Universal starts. He's not much younger, but he's a younger brother. They had the novelty that they were part of the 90s boom, and then they hung around long enough that they were part of the Mexico boom, too. They headline, if you want to call it guys who headline a lot of big shows, they did a lot of headlining of big shows. But they did a lot of headlining of big shows as Cien Caras does a singles match, or Máscara Años 2000 does a singles match, or maybe they're with 10 other people in the cage match or something. They were kind of the opposite of their nephews here. NGD are really a trio whose focus is on trios wrestling, who occasionally, especially more in the CML days, was AAA is boring and dumb. CML days, they would get split up and run into singles matches and do those as well. But their focus, especially now, is they're the best trio in the world and they fight all the other trios. Hermanos de Aminta were singles wrestlers who had each other's back and would team up in trios matches to build to those singles matches. And NGD is building to the trios matches themselves. So if you do just by the tag team, no, they're not even close, and it's kind of ridiculous to on the ballot. If you do it but they're on the ballot, so that means we're not supposed to use those rules. So if you count everything, then yeah, Cien Caras is a borderline Hall of Fame guy on his own. It's a guy who's on this ballot and argued about for years. And if you count everything his brothers did during those runs, then obviously Máscara Años 2000 and Universal are upper level guys, not top level guys, but they did big shows. They were influential. They were drawing power. People go on and have drill down fights about were they actually bad or were they actually good. But you can take the other two criteria, and if you count anything they did while they were a team, then yeah, they count. It's good. Drill them in there. Who cares? Last one, Los Villanos. Who cares? I'm doing an hour on this. I'm saying, who cares? Los Villanos are the 5 sons of Hall of Famer Ray Mendoza. Technically the villains. It's like so weird how much of the time they spent as Technicos, to the point that the magazine starts to make fun of, like, you're Villanos. Why are you guys all these Technicos? Especially, like, early on. And then everyone just kind of gets used to it and they're like, yeah, that's just what they are. Even though there are 5 brothers here, they are a wide age gap. Villano 1 is 17 years older than Villano 4, who's actually the youngest. It's a story, don't ask. If you don't know, you can look cool or something, but Villano 4 is the youngest. There are a lot of different Villano combinations because there's 5 of them. Of course, there's a lot of different combinations. We have Villano 1 and Villano 2, who were like preliminary tag teams in Arena Mexico for about a decade. They would slip on Friday cards sometimes. They were like when it was a much more hierarchical thing where like you had to be a bigger star to be on a Friday show, and like the prelim guys were all on the Tuesday shows or the Sunday shows. You had to really be a big star to be on the Friday show. And they would sometimes make it on the Friday shows, and sometimes they would disappear. And it was a point of frustration because these are the sons of Ray Mendoza, even if no one's copying it to that point. And meanwhile, so the Mendoza kids are just not getting pushed, not getting opportunities, and they think they deserve better. And the father definitely thinks they deserve better. Meanwhile, CML EML is pushing a couple kids named Mendoza, but instead it's Ringo and Cachorro Mendoza. And they are getting bigger opportunities, and they are being pushed into being stars, and like that's driving the other Mendoza family insane, because these are unrelated people. It kind of made logic at the time because EML was much more about doing hair matches, and the Villanos were masked, so they couldn't do hair matches, and they could like beat the Ringo and Cachorro whenever they wanted, and have them win other times. So they worked for the position better, but that didn't make any sense to them. So they're teaming, they're like hanging on the fringes of the Friday night roster, but they're not really going anywhere or making any progress. They're doing more of their work at like Arena Capan or like the predecessor to it than those kind of B arenas. Villano 3 is active, but he's a lighter weight guy than even his brothers, and my interpretation of what happened is that his father thought, you're just not going to make an EML if your brothers can't make it. Go work the indies until we figure something out. And he goes works the indies, and he does really well for himself. So that he's a big star when the Villanos and their father all just have enough with EML and goes join Promotion More when it starts. Villano 3 starts in Mexico City with them and immediately is one of their young stars. His brothers keep teaming on the undercard. Very interestingly, they don't make it any farther when they're out of EML than when they are. All 3 brothers start teaming in 1974 when UWA Promotion More starts. It's a mid-card team because the focus is still on Villano 3 as a single star, but that's when the Brazos feud starts. They're mixing up with the other trios teams at that time. They're just not a top trios teams because that's just not going to be the priority. Villano 2 is also like his heart is never into wrestling, or he loses it pretty quickly, and he has personal issues and passes away early. But he has injuries too that take him out for a time. So when it becomes 1, 4, and 5, it's more Villano 2 just can't go, and eventually he's not around. 1, 4, and 5 are the ones who have the famous mass match with the Brazos. But they're not the ones who have been feuding with them. That's not the combination that's been feuding with them the longest. They also hang around as UWA Trios champions. They are higher pushed in 1 and 2 and 3 because they've got a little bit older at that point. 1 has become like a institution of the promotion where he gets some singles runs themselves. And also by the end of that run, like UWA is going downhill very fast, like post 1992, and those are guys who are credible guys who have not jumped someplace else, so they're still getting pushed. 1 has his own injuries and also passes away early, and 3, once UWA goes down, he has single success, but the default trio becomes 3, 4, and 5. They get split up for a few years when 4 and 5 go to WCW, but generally that's like that's the legacy Living Legends team is the 3, 4, 5 team. It's like 4 different eras, and then 3 breaks down, it gets old, and it's 4 and 5 stick around. That's like, oh, we remember the Villanos. Here are the Villanos. They were rotund and they will punch you in the face, and that's all they can do at this point. If we go on the strictest reading of the rules, like you can only count the matches when they're a team. The Villanos are paradoxically not supposed to be on this ballot because there's no time where 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 ever all team. 2 is pretty much done before 4 and 5 really get rolling. There's just, it just does not make any sense. There's like no one team, there's no one period that alone would consider them a Hall of Fame team. Like if you come out the 2 different trios, the middle 2 trios, or the last 2 trios, I guess it is. It's 1, 4, and 5 have the big mass match, or UW standouts. They are stars on the last good hero of UWA, and then as it falls off. And 3, 4, and 5 are the guys who are just like the guys from the past era who go to wrestle every promotion that's left in Mexico, who everyone respects because of what they've done, even if they're not pushed all the way to the top. Bono 2, like I can't remember which Von Erich is which Von Erich. And he's probably better than the worst Von Erich of the 5 kids, but he's not like. It seems like a more sad situation. He was not like a guy who wasted his life. It's like if he had access to the resources we have today, he might have had a better outcome. But as his wrestling career alone, it's really, really hard to justify like putting Volano 2 in a Hall of Fame of any merit. So where I came out here is that Anel Blanco and Dr. Wagner are close enough. I'm just holding my temples as I try to work through this. Anel Blanco and Dr. Wagner are close enough that just throw them in. Don't worry about it. Ramos Diamita, I'm kind of in between. Like, if I use the rules, no. If I don't use the rules, yeah. But, so we'll just see how many votes we have left. And then I'm leaving Los Volanos off. Los Volanos are only on here because Volano 4 was in the mass match. Let's be real here. If that just not happened this year, no one would have thought to put them on there. And if we're putting Volano 4 on the ballot, we're putting the Volanos on because the last one left is doing singles matches. What sense does that make? That's like Rafael Primero winning a Gold Glove kind of nonsense. So we have 3 names left. Thank God, because I want to be done with this. I thank God a lot today. I don't know what the deal is. Pirata Morgan, Sangerchan, La Perca, AAA. And then I can move on with my life. Pirata Morgan, nickname El Mejor Luchador del Mundo, which is kind of what a nickname you want if you're trying to get a Hall of Fame. That's very helpful. He's a guy who's been on forever, but the problem is that, like, 80s Pirata Morgan, great, has an argument as El Mejor Luchador del Mundo at times. Early 90s Luchador, still pretty good. And then he's a guy who's around forever, who is completely, like, 100% Lucha Libre, but also completely 100. You're seeing him. I would see him at a indoor soccer field with a ring put on top of it in front of 100 fans where kids are running around. The microphone is half working. The match ends with a foul. And the heel referee is somehow involved. And then there are promos that don't go afterwards. He's that Lucha Libre. In some ways, you kind of want that Lucha Libre still representing the Hall of Fame, but he spent so much of his career as a guy who was just like getting by in guile and working small shows. Just kind of like, you admire the hustle, but he's a low level. He spent so much of his career as like a low level memory of the past that it's like it's definitely affected how people see the rest of his career, and it's definitely affected how I see his career. He's historically significant because he's a memorable guy. He's a guy who lost his eye in a match. That's kind of memorable. He also was like a big part of EML for many years. Had some falling out, I think, and then he's not part of EML. But like he was also a guy who was not, and he was a guy who was like, for a time, was a great worker. He's like a guy who could just not keep either. If he kept his career going for long enough, he would have been like. He starts to fall off at exactly the right time because that's the wrong time because that's when everyone else is taking off with the AAA boom and the TV stuff, and he's like a bigger name at that point would carry a lot more weight because we've seen a lot of people from that era do very well. But I think he spent so much time as just a guy and a guy that's like a guy who's getting by on the memories of his past. That's like, it's tough to give him longevity credit when like a lot of the longevity has not been super great. I feel like I could have waited if I just like went through if I found enough Peralta Morgan matches from the 1980s that just convinced me that he's a super outstanding worker that has to be in no matter what you think of the other two categories, but I just have not seen those matches. Sangre Chicana, El Amo del Scandalo. He's a great brawler. I don't know why capitalized you there. That's going to bug me. But that's kind of thing. It's like, he's a guy who was not getting much hype maybe a decade ago, and then maybe longer than that. But then like that Lucha DVD or Lucha A set should take credit if he ever gets in the Hall of Fame, because it rediscovered a lot of matches that were just like, or put together matches that were on one straight channel or on different tape, and they were all over the place, and eventually those migrated to YouTube, and everyone could see that, oh yeah, these guys had some great matches. It was just like no one noticed because he was in the 80s doing it in Mexico, so it was not covered anyplace else. I think if you look at his record, and I might pull this up and type some more very loudly, he's like, if EML had a voting of who's going to be the top star of the 80s, they would probably pick someone who's still around, like Satanica or Atlantis. Let's be real here. But if you look at what he actually did, like, there's a crazy amount of Arena Mexico plus some matches there. And that's even, like, if you go to the history, there's a few times he's like, I'm done with this. I just want to go back to Monterrey and wrestle around there. I want to stay near my home. I'm sick of living in Mexico City. I'm just going to go be a big draw and just, like, drive the shows and drive home every day. And they have to convince him to come back. But they do convince him to come back, and he beats, like, everybody except like Perro Aguayo, and then he even actually beats Perro Aguayo. He's the real deal of like guys who are big of top stars. The argument you have to make against him is that Arena Mexico was not drawing well then, but like it seemed like for the bigger shows they were still doing really well, and it just wasn't noticed because it wasn't on TV in Mexico, in its home country, and it was not something that people outside of Mexico were following all that much. But you can see the respect in the booking that they put him over everyone, and only pushing some Perro Aguayo, a Hall of Fame wrestler, like an inner Hall of Fame guy. Even after Speak, he's still beating people. And like he's like, I think the other thing we can't quantify well is like he's like, anecdotally, he's a big draw in northern Mexico around Monterrey, even long after he's not around the Arena Mexico. But that's tougher to get numbers. The results are even less complete there than they are for Mexico City stuff. But he's a guy who endured for a long time. I think the problem with him is that that's the 1980s, and then TV, and people start paying attention to Lucha's Labor in 1992, and he's like a guy losing to Vampiro, and a guy now losing La Fiera in EML as that promotion goes down because it's not the cool promotion. But he's a guy that, in the context of his time, seems like a clear. He was a top star, would really lose. He was a guy that, like, this is going through old magazines like I did the last couple of years. One of the things that stuck out to me is that when they wanted to get Sin Carlos over early on, when he was just a big tall guy, they just like immediately buddied him up to Sangre Chicana because they knew Sangre Chicana, just like being in his orbit, would just make Sin Carlos a man right, a made man right away, and it worked because Sin Carlos was a big star following that, and I think that speaks to his influence at that and his drawing power at that point, and it's like his importance at that point. So I say yes, he's a headliner. It's tough to tell, like, drawing power in the 80s, tough to tell. In Complete Records, we're making a lot of guesses, but I lean towards yes. And just listen to people talk about Sangre Chicana and MS Uno, and you will say, yeah, he's a great worker. He has exciting matches. I think he's hurt because he's a great unmasked star at a time where unmasked stars suddenly become a lot less popular. And he's a great unmasked star when, like, he ages physically, facially very badly. Like, he looked like he's looked like an old man for many, many years, and probably because he lived a very hard life. He enjoyed his life, but he probably lived a very hard life. It's the impression I get. But I think like that 10-year stretch that he had in the 80s, and that's enough that I would put him in on that alone. With even you can make arguments about other points. Well, Parker at AAA, he's like forever going to be known as the other guy. But like to people who watch AAA, he was the guy in the certain era. He was the guy they saw every week. He was the guy that would go on Televisa and win awards for Best Luchador of the Year or more fancy, more popular, more well-renowned CML guys. It may have been because AAA was like in Televisa were working together to make sure that Parker got over. But at least speaks to where they positioned him in AAA. Is that he was the face of AAA, and like if you watch AAA, he's still the face of AAA in the way because they always put his image as the last thing you see when the episode ends over the copyright screen. So like he's still something that at least to the company still sees as a very important image. He was never a good wrestler, and then he was like a hilariously limited wrestler after his shoulder got messed up in the car accident. And you've never seen someone do so many one-arm backbreakers and other stuff. Like he knew how to interact with the crowd, and he figured out comedy, and he figured out how to work with what he had. And you have to give him credit for that. But he was the guy who was working a WWF in the 80s like crazy schedule, working so many shows, so many places, and it's not like whatever the transportation issues were for WWF guys, it's like 10 times worse for trying to get around Mexico, trying to get from one small city to another small city where you're taking buses instead of driving most of the time. So I have no idea how he did as many shows as he did and how he lasted that long. And his wrestling's so good, but like on some level you can understand why his wrestling kind of was never going to be any good doing the schedule he was being given. I think historically significant because he was just the face of AAA for so long. He headlined so many of their big shows. So it was some of those shows were during the bad era of AAA. Some of their shows were a few times they drew well. Some of them are super memorable. He was not a great worker, and he's a guy who I think like if he was a U.S. star and he stayed on the ballot long enough, there would be kids who watched Will Parker when they were 8 or 10 or 12, and once they start voting for people in their 30s, like they would have fond recollections of him and what he meant to them, and like this historical significance would be right higher for them. But I just don't think it's going to. But that's just not how the literally rave section, the Mexican wrestling section, tends to work. I think he'll probably drop off far before then. He's worth a consideration, but I don't think I would vote for him. I'm not voting for him. I don't think so. So that's where we are. Oh my God, we're done. Thank goodness. So what I ended up coming up with was Mystico, Hurricane Ramirez, Anel Blanco, Singer Chicana is definitely my votes. I am guessing throwing the vote to Los Hermanos Dinamita unless I get talked out of it between now and whenever I actually throw my vote up there. As the best of the 5 choices, and I just feel like I want to use up my 5 choices. I like Darrell Dixon better, even though like his qualifications are worse. But I'd just be happier about seeing him in there. I would be happy about seeing Rio Romero in there, but Rio Romero's not going to get in there anyways. I know there are people swear by Roger Morgan who are going to be disappointed I'm not going to vote for them. But it's like you only can choose 5. I like. There's 4 strong candidates. Mystico, Hurricane Ramirez, Singer Chicana. I guess 3 strong candidates. The 3 singles wrestlers. By the screwy rules that we're using that no one understands and no one agrees on, Ola Blanco belong on that list. And then Diamantes, if we're using those rules, then I also guess I have to throw Diamantes. But I don't feel strongly about those. I wish it was different. It's not different. It is what it is. I hope you learned something, which is, if you didn't learn something, I hope you were like, you got to the 49-minute of this mark and of this rambling, talking over myself video. I thought, I'm glad I did not waste my time. I'm glad this does not feel like a waste of time to watch all this. That's what I'm going for. You just did not waste your time. If you listen to double speed and it was only like 25 minutes, all the better for you. But like, I hope this like this was not a bad decision you made. It may have been a bad decision I made, but now it's over. I'd never have to think about it again for a full year. So, thanks for listening.